Thalassa was 72, a retired schoolteacher who had spent most of her life by the sea. Her home overlooked the gentle waves, and every morning she would sit by the window, sipping tea and watching fishing boats return with their catch. Life had always felt calm here. She baked bread for neighbors, tended to her rose garden, and took pride in staying healthy by eating plenty of fresh fruit. But one autumn morning, the calm broke. She was carrying a basket of laundry when her vision blurred and her right hand went weak. The laundry slipped to the floor, and so did her heart. Her daughter rushed her to the hospital. The tests came quickly, and so did the doctor's words. "You had a mild stroke." The phrase landed like a cold wave against her chest. She thought strokes were for people who never took care of themselves, for those who lived on fried foods and cigarettes. Not for someone like her, who enjoyed grapes in the afternoon, mango with breakfast, and a tall glass of orange juice every morning. The idea that the very foods she believed were protecting her could also harm her was unthinkable. I still remember sitting with her in that small hospital room, holding her hand. As a doctor for over 3 decades, I've seen this scene far too many times, yet it's never easy when the patient is someone you care for. Thalassa's eyes searched mine for answers, and all I could offer at first was quiet reassurance. But inside, I knew the conversation we needed to have would change the way she looked at food forever. Because yes, fruits are nature's gift, colorful, sweet, nourishing, but for certain bodies, at certain ages, and in certain amounts, they can quietly work against us. She didn't understand at first. "How can something so natural be dangerous?" she asked. So I explained the way our bodies change with age, how sugar, potassium, and even the acids in fruit behave differently in someone in their 70s compared to someone in their 30s. I told her about the hidden spikes in blood sugar, the strain on blood vessels, the way these small daily choices stack up over years. And I could see in her eyes the moment the pieces began to fit together, the fatigue she'd been feeling, the dizzy spells she had brushed off, the racing heartbeat after certain meals. In the days after her stroke, she began her quiet transformation. It wasn't dramatic or fast. There were no overnight changes, but every morning she asked me what fruit she could enjoy without worry. She learned to savor smaller portions, to pair her fruit with protein, to choose the varieties that loved her body back. She began reading labels, asking better questions, and most importantly, listening to the whispers of her own health before they turned into alarms. That's why I'm telling you Thalassa's story, because someone you love, maybe even you, could be standing where she stood, believing you're safe while risk slowly builds beneath the surface. And just like Thalassa, you deserve to know the truth before it's too late. Tonight, as the sun sets over her little seaside home, she sits with a cup of tea and a slice of pear, her new favorite, and she smiles, knowing that this time she's not just enjoying the moment, she's protecting her future. The week after Thalassa came home from the hospital, I visited her on a breezy Tuesday afternoon. The curtains in her kitchen fluttered with the wind, carrying the scent of the sea. On the table sat a small porcelain bowl filled with green grapes glistening under the sunlight. She smiled as she reached for one. "They're my favorite," she said softly, almost as if to remind herself. I knew she believed grapes were harmless, nature's candy, full of water and sweetness, but I also knew that for someone in her position, they weren't always the friends she thought they were. I asked her if she'd ever noticed feeling unusually tired after a long afternoon snack. She thought for a moment, chewing slowly, then nodded. "Yes, sometimes I feel my head go light and I need to sit down." That's when I explained that grapes, especially the sweet varieties she loved, were packed with fructose that could quickly raise her blood sugar. "But my blood sugar tests are fine," she argued gently. I smiled, a kind, knowing smile, and told her that even if numbers looked fine in routine tests, sudden spikes could still put strain on her blood vessels, quietly setting the stage for trouble. That day, I didn't lecture her. I simply asked her to try something for a week. Instead of eating 20 grapes in one sitting, have just 5 or 6, and always with a few almonds or a slice of cheese. The healthy fat and protein would slow the sugar rush. She agreed, not because she fully understood yet, but because she trusted me. In that trust, I saw the first small shift, the opening of a door in her mind. Later that week, her daughter Elena called me. "Mama's been doing what you said," she laughed softly. "She still has her grapes, but now she gets this little plate out with cheese. She says it makes her feel less dizzy." It was such a small change, almost invisible to anyone else, but to me, it was the first thread in a larger tapestry we were about to weave. And perhaps more importantly, I could see that Thalassa was starting to pay closer attention to the quiet signals of her own body. She wasn't just eating grapes anymore, she was noticing how they made her feel, noticing whether her heart beat differently, whether her breath felt steady. That awareness was worth more than any strict diet plan or rigid rule. Because once you begin listening to your own body's whispers, you're far less likely to be surprised by its shouts. That afternoon, as I left her home, I glanced back at the kitchen window. She was standing there watching me go, the little bowl of grapes still on the table. But this time, next to it was a small wedge of cheese. A simple pairing, yes, but also a quiet promise to herself. And in the soft, golden light of the afternoon, it felt like a good start. A few mornings later, I stopped by unannounced. Thalassa was in her kitchen, wearing her soft wool cardigan, peeling a banana over the sink. The sun poured in from the east-facing window, lighting up the golden fruit in her hand. "Good morning," she greeted me warmly. "I was just making my breakfast." On the counter beside her sat a cup of chamomile tea, a slice of rye bread, and the entire banana she planned to eat. Bananas had always been her go-to morning snack. They were easy, filling, and for decades she had believed they were the perfect start to the day. "They keep my legs from cramping," she told me once, "because of the potassium." And she wasn't wrong. Potassium is essential for heart and muscle health. But as I watched her take that first bite, I asked gently, "Do you ever notice your heart beating harder after breakfast?" She stopped mid-chew, surprised. "How did you know?" she asked. I explained that for many people her age, especially those taking blood pressure medications, too much potassium at once could cause unexpected effects. Sometimes an irregular heartbeat, sometimes a feeling of heaviness in the chest. "You're not in danger from one banana," I reassured her, "but your body may not process it like it did 30 years ago." She was quiet for a moment, then placed the rest of the banana on the counter. That day, we tried something new. I cut the banana in half and wrapped the other half for later. "Eat just half in the morning," I suggested, "and have the other half with your afternoon tea if you want it." I could see her hesitate. Old habits are hard to change, especially when they've been with you for decades. But she agreed, more out of curiosity than fear. The next morning, I got a message from her daughter. "Mama says her heartbeat felt calmer today. She thinks you're a magician." I laughed at that, but really it wasn't magic. It was simply giving her body less to handle all at once. In time, Thalassa began pairing her half banana with a boiled egg or a handful of walnuts. She liked how it kept her energy steady until lunch, without the sudden wave of fatigue she used to feel mid-morning. More than that, she started thinking differently about portions. She told me, "I used to believe if one was good, two was better. Now I see my body's not a young thing anymore. It needs gentleness." It was a beautiful thing to witness, this shift from blind trust in healthy foods to mindful, intentional choices. One morning, I found her at her little kitchen table, slicing her banana into thin coins, arranging them carefully on toast spread with almond butter. She looked up and smiled. "See, I'm learning." And she was, not just about bananas, but about herself. She was beginning to see that protecting her heart wasn't about giving things up. It was about meeting her body where it was, here and now, and offering it exactly what it could handle with ease. It was a warm Saturday afternoon when I found Thalassa in her garden, trimming the last blooms from her roses. On the small wooden bench beside her sat a basket wrapped in paper, a gift from her neighbor. When she peeled back the wrapping, the golden skin of ripe mangoes glistened in the sun, their scent rich and sweet. Her face lit up instantly. "Mangoes! My favorite summer treat," she said with a childlike delight. For Thalassa, mangoes were more than fruit. They were tied to memories. She told me about summers from her youth, eating them barefoot in the backyard, juice running down her arms. I listened, smiling, but in my mind I thought of what I knew. One medium mango held more sugar than a can of soda. For someone like her with fragile blood vessels and a recent brush with a stroke, that was a sweetness she couldn't afford all at once. She didn't see the risk. "But it's fruit," she reminded me. "It's natural." I nodded. Yes, it's natural, but the body treats sugar the same way whether it comes from a mango or a cake. And in seniors, that rapid sugar surge can make blood thicker, slower to flow, increasing the chance of clotting. I didn't want to dim her joy, but I also couldn't let her eat the whole fruit without a thought. We went inside and I suggested an experiment. I sliced the mango in half, then diced just one half into small cubes, placing them in a small ceramic bowl. Beside it, I set a plate with cucumber slices and a few fresh spinach leaves from her garden. "Try eating the mango with these," I told her. She looked puzzled at first, but agreed. The crisp cucumber and leafy greens slowed her bites, softened the sweetness, and gave her body fiber to ease the sugar's rush into her blood. Afterwards, she leaned back and said, "You know, I'm full, and I didn't even eat the whole thing." I smiled because this was exactly the point, to enjoy the taste without flooding her system. In that small moment, I saw her second big shift. She realized she could still indulge in her favorite foods, but with balance. A week later, she told me she had started slicing mango into thin strips and adding them to her salads instead of eating them in big chunks. "It makes the whole meal feel special," she said, "and I don't get that heavy, sleepy feeling afterwards." Her voice carried pride, not the kind that comes from resisting temptation, but from finding a gentler way to enjoy life without fear. And perhaps that was the deeper change. She was learning that protecting her health didn't mean stripping joy away. It meant weaving her pleasures into a pattern her body could live with. One small, thoughtful choice at a time. That basket of mangoes in her kitchen wasn't a threat anymore. It was simply a gift she knew how to receive wisely. One rainy afternoon, I visited Thalassa unplanned. The air was heavy with the scent of the sea after the storm, and her little house felt even cozier than usual. She was sitting in her favorite armchair, a knitted shawl around her shoulders, flipping through an old photo album. On the small side table next to her was a crystal dish filled with golden raisins and dried apricots. She popped one into her mouth without even looking, lost in her memories. "Just a few for company," she said when she saw me glance at the dish. I knew dried fruit had been her comfort for years, easy to keep, easy to snack on. But I also knew the trap. Drying fruit squeezes all the sweetness into a smaller bite, stripping away much of the water and some of the fiber. What's left is a sugar-dense morsel that's far easier to overeat than fresh fruit. I asked gently, "Do you know how many of those you've had today?" She laughed, a little embarrassed. "Maybe 10 or 20? I reached for the dish, tipping it slightly so she could see how small the raisins really were. "It doesn't look like much," I told her, "but that could be the sugar of 2 or 3 whole bananas, all in a few handfuls." Her brow furrowed. She hadn't thought of it that way. I didn't tell her to stop eating them. That would only make them more tempting. Instead, I suggested a ritual. Instead of keeping the whole dish beside you, take just one small spoonful and put the rest away. And always have them with a few almonds or walnuts. She agreed, curious to see if it would make a difference. The next week, she told me something unexpected. "I tried it your way," she said, "and I didn't feel that heavy fog in my head after my afternoon tea. I thought it was just the weather that made me tired before, but maybe it was the raisins." She chuckled softly at her own realization. It was another piece of the puzzle for her, seeing that even tiny foods could have a big impact on her energy and clarity. One afternoon, Elena came by while I was there. She leaned over to whisper, "Mama hides her dried fruit now. Says if she doesn't see it, she won't keep reaching for it." I couldn't help but smile. That's how awareness works. Once you notice a pattern, you naturally start changing it. As I left, I saw the crystal dish sitting high on a kitchen shelf, well out of reach from her armchair. In its place on the side table was a small plate with apple slices and a few walnuts. The raisins and apricots would still have their place in her life, but now they were a treat she chose intentionally, not a habit she slipped into without thought. And that, for Thalassa, was the third quiet victory in her journey. Not just learning what to eat or avoid, but learning how to live in a way where food no longer had the power to sneak past her awareness. A week later, I stopped by Thalassa's home on a bright Sunday morning. The air was fresh from the night's rain, and the kitchen was alive with the sound of a knife tapping against the cutting board. She stood there, smiling, slicing into a golden pineapple. Its sweet, tangy scent filled the room. "I thought we could have some with breakfast," she said cheerfully. Pineapple had always been one of her favorites, especially when the weather turned warm. I watched as she cut thick, generous wedges, stacking them neatly on a plate. "It's good for digestion," she added knowingly. She wasn't wrong. Pineapple does contain bromelain, an enzyme that helps break down protein. But I also knew the other side of the story. Its high sugar content and acidity could be harsh for someone with delicate blood vessels, a sensitive stomach, or a history of blood pressure swings. As we sat down, I asked her, "Do you remember ever feeling a little lightheaded or flushed after eating a lot of pineapple?" She paused, thinking. Sometimes, especially if I eat it first thing in the morning, but I thought it was just the heat. I explained gently that pineapple's natural sugars can cause a quick spike in blood sugar, and its acidity might irritate the stomach lining, triggering a small stress response in the body. For someone with her history, it wasn't about fear, it was about balance. I suggested we try something different. Instead of the thick wedges, I cut the pineapple into small cubes, just enough to fill half a teacup. Then I placed the fruit over a bed of chopped spinach and sprinkled a handful of sunflower seeds on top. The greens would provide fiber to slow sugar absorption, and the seeds would add healthy fats for balance. She raised an eyebrow at first, but took a bite. That's different, she said, surprised. It's still sweet, but it doesn't feel so heavy. We enjoyed the rest slowly, savoring each piece instead of devouring them in quick bites. And when we finished, she didn't have that faint, restless energy she sometimes felt after eating fruit on its own. A few days later, she told me she had started making pineapple salads instead of eating big chunks straight from the cutting board. Sometimes she mixed it with cucumber and mint, other times with cottage cheese. It feels like a treat, but it doesn't leave me tired, she said with a smile. It was another gentle shift. She was learning that she didn't have to avoid the fruits she loved, only to give them a softer place in her meals. The pineapple was no longer a sharp rush of sugar and acid. It had become part of a balanced moment, a choice that worked with her body instead of against it. As I left that morning, I glanced back to see her at the kitchen counter, packing the remaining pineapple into a glass jar, ready to pair with her next salad. It wasn't just about the fruit anymore. It was about the thought, the care, and the patience she was bringing to each decision, and that was worth more than any diet rule I could give her. One chilly afternoon, I found Thalassa in her small pantry, reaching for a jar of homemade jam. Next to it sat 2 unopened cans of peaches, their bright labels showing sunny slices swimming in golden syrup. She noticed my eyes linger on them and chuckled. "Oh, these are for rainy days. Elena bought them for me. You never know when you'll want something sweet." Canned fruit had been part of her kitchen for decades, a holdover from her early years when fresh produce wasn't always available. She thought of it as a harmless comfort, a convenient substitute when she couldn't get to the market. But I knew better. The syrup those peaches sat in was more than just sweet juice. It was concentrated sugar, often with added preservatives, ready to flood her system the moment she took a bite. We stood there in the pantry for a moment, and I asked her, "Have you ever read the label on these?" She shook her head. I turned the can around, pointing to the fine print. Nearly 20 grams of sugar per half-cup serving, and most people, without thinking, eat far more than that in one go. Her face shifted, the realization slowly settling in. "But it's fruit," she said again softly, as if hoping the words might make it harmless. I didn't tell her to throw them away. Instead, I took 1 can to the sink, opened it, and poured the syrup down the drain. I rinsed the peaches under cool water, then placed them in a bowl with a sprinkle of cinnamon and a spoonful of plain yogurt. "If you ever want canned fruit," I told her, "choose the ones packed in water or 100% juice, and rinse them well before eating. It won't take away all the sugar, but it will make it gentler on your body." She took a bite and nodded. "It's not as sweet, but it tastes fresher," she admitted. Later that week, she told me she had started keeping just 1 can in the pantry, packed in juice, not syrup, and saving it for when she truly wanted it, not just for convenience. A few days after that, Elena called me. "Mama's changed her rainy day snack," she said with a hint of amusement. "Now it's half a peach with yogurt and a sprinkle of nuts. She says it feels like dessert, but she doesn't get that sugar crash anymore." It was another quiet turning point for Thalassa. She wasn't simply following my advice, she was making it her own, adapting it to her life in a way that felt natural. The pantry still held sweet memories and small comforts, but it no longer held hidden dangers waiting to catch her off guard. And as I left her house that evening, I thought about how change often begins, not with sweeping resolutions, but with small acts of awareness. Sometimes it's as simple as choosing to pour a little sweetness down the drain so you can hold on to the sweetness of life a little longer. The first truly hot day of summer arrived early that year, and I found Thalassa sitting on her front porch, a bowl of watermelon slices balanced on her lap. The fruit glistened in the sunlight, tiny rivers of juice running down her fingers as she bit into each piece. "Perfect for a day like this," she said between bites, eyes closed in satisfaction. Watermelon had always been her seasonal favorite, refreshing, light, and a symbol of long, lazy afternoons. To her, it was pure hydration, the healthiest thing she could eat on a hot day. And yet, I knew that for someone her age and with her medical history, there was more to consider than just the water content. I sat beside her and asked, "Do you remember ever feeling suddenly tired or dizzy after eating a lot of this?" She looked at me, a little surprised. "Sometimes, yes, but I thought it was just the heat." I explained that while watermelon is mostly water, it also contains natural sugars and a fair amount of potassium. In large servings, those can raise blood sugar quickly and even tip electrolyte balance in people with sensitive systems or certain medications. She frowned at her bowl, suddenly seeing it differently. "But it's so light," she protested gently. I reassured her. She didn't need to give it up, just rethink how she enjoyed it. I took her bowl, cut the watermelon into smaller cubes, and measured out a modest cupful. Then I sprinkled a pinch of chopped mint over it and handed her a small dish of almonds. "Eat these together," I suggested. "The mint makes it fresher, and the almonds slow the sugar from rushing into your blood." She tried it and smiled. "Oh, this feels different," she said after a few bites. "It's not just sweet, it's refreshing without making me heavy." That was exactly the point. By slowing the pace and pairing it with something grounding, she could enjoy her summer ritual without the sudden crash afterwards. Over the next few weeks, she made it her own. Sometimes she added feta cheese to her watermelon, sometimes cucumber. She discovered that these combinations not only made her feel better, but also turned the fruit into something more special, a dish to savor instead of devour. One afternoon, Elena told me, "Mama's been bragging about her fancy watermelon salad. She even served it to the neighbor." I laughed, imagining her proudly passing around bowls of her reinvented favorite. The change with watermelon was subtle but meaningful. It wasn't just about reducing sugar spikes, it was about turning a habit into a conscious choice, an indulgence into an art. And for Thalassa, that meant summer could still taste like summer, just without the hidden risks she once never saw coming. One morning, I arrived at Thalassa's home earlier than usual. The kitchen was bathed in soft gold light, and she was already busy at the counter. A small glass sat beside her tea mug, filled to the brim with fresh orange juice. She looked up and smiled. "Ah, my morning sunshine." She lifted it proudly, as if it were a ritual worth celebrating. For as long as she could remember, orange juice had been her way of starting the day. It was quick, refreshing, and in her mind, the very picture of health. "Full of vitamin C," she reminded me, "keeps colds away." I smiled, but knew this was one of the most common misconceptions I saw in my older patients. The juice may have vitamins, yes, but without the fiber of the whole fruit, it's little more than a concentrated sugar drink, the kind that could set her heart racing before breakfast was even over. I asked her if she'd ever noticed a sudden burst of energy after her juice, followed by a dip mid-morning. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Sometimes I feel hungry again an hour later, even after breakfast. I thought I just had a fast metabolism." I explained that the sugar and juice entered her bloodstream so quickly, her body responded with a surge of insulin, which often left her feeling empty and tired not long after. She stared into her glass for a moment, clearly reluctant to part with the habit. I reassured her she didn't have to give it up entirely. "Think of it as a treat, not a drink," I said, "and if you have it, make it small and always with food, not on its own." I poured her juice into a smaller cup, just 4 ounces, and set it beside her plate of boiled eggs and whole grain toast. "Now it's part of breakfast, not the whole event," I told her. She took a sip and laughed softly. "It tastes sweeter in the smaller glass," she admitted. That week, she began diluting her juice with water, stretching the flavor while cutting the sugar hit. Soon, she was drinking juice only a few mornings a week, replacing it on others with slices of fresh orange, complete with the pith and all its hidden fiber. Elena noticed the change before Thalassa did. "Mama's not having those late morning crashes anymore," she told me. "She says she feels steadier." It wasn't just her energy that had evened out, her mood had too. No more shaky, restless mornings that left her wandering the house looking for something sweet to eat. One morning I found her squeezing half an orange into a tall glass of sparkling water, smiling at the fizz. "My new sunshine," she called it. And just like that, what had once been a daily sugar surge had transformed into a lighter, more mindful pleasure, one that honored her health without losing the small joys she cherished. It was a Thursday afternoon when I found Thalassa in the small cafe near the market. She was seated at a corner table, sipping from a tall plastic cup crowned with a swirl of whipped cream. The drink was pale yellow with streaks of pink, a smoothie, the kind the cafe advertised as 100% natural fruit, no added sugar. She looked pleased with herself, as if she had just made a wise, healthy choice. "I skipped dessert for this," she said proudly, pushing the cup toward me. "It's fruit, so it must be better for me, right?" I smiled, but knew exactly what was hiding in that cheerful drink. Smoothies, especially store-bought ones, were often sugar traps, packed with multiple high-sugar fruits, fruit juice bases, and sometimes sweetened yogurt. Without the intact fiber of whole fruit, those sugars surged through the bloodstream almost as quickly as candy. I asked if I could look at the cafe's menu. Sure enough, her smoothie contained banana, mango, pineapple, and a full cup of apple juice. The perfect storm for a blood sugar spike. I explained gently, "Even though this is fruit, it's still a lot of sugar in one sitting. Your body can't slow it down without fiber, and that quick rush isn't kind to your heart or your blood vessels," she frowned. "But I thought blending was good, easier to digest." I nodded. "It's easier for your stomach, yes, but sometimes too easy. Your body doesn't have to work to break it down, so all that sweetness hits at once." She took a thoughtful sip, and I suggested a change. "If you want a smoothie, make it at home. Use half fruit, half vegetables, and always add something with protein or healthy fat, like chia seeds, yogurt, or a spoon of nut butter." That weekend, I visited her kitchen to find a blender on the counter and a small basket of spinach, cucumber, berries, and a single banana. "I'm trying your way," she said with a little grin. She blended her own drink, pale green and flecked with purple from the berries. The taste was fresher, lighter, and far less sweet. "It feels cleaner," she admitted after the first sip. Over the next week, she began taking her homemade smoothie in a small glass, no more giant cafe cups. She noticed her energy stayed steadier, her mind clearer. One morning, she even called me just to say, "I didn't get sleepy after my smoothie today. I think I've cracked the code." What I loved most was how she didn't see it as giving something up. She was still enjoying smoothies, just ones that loved her back. And each time she chose her blender over the cafe, she was proving to herself that she could keep her pleasures and protect her health at the same time. One sunny afternoon, Elena invited me to join her and Thalassa at a small health cafe near the harbor. The place was bright and modern, filled with plants and the smell of freshly ground coffee. When I arrived, Thalassa was already seated at a table by the window, a wide, colorful bowl in front of her. The deep purple base was topped with banana slices, granola, shredded coconut, and a generous drizzle of honey. She looked up and smiled. "This is my treat today. That's all healthy, right?" From the way she said it, I could tell she genuinely believed it. After all, acai was marketed as a superfood, full of antioxidants, good for the heart, good for the brain. And she wasn't wrong about the acai itself. But as I looked at the bowl, I knew the problem wasn't in the berries. It was in everything piled on top. Bananas, sweetened granola, coconut flakes, dried fruit, honey. Together, they could easily push the sugar count past 50 grams, more than some desserts. I didn't want to spoil her enjoyment, so I asked if I could taste it. The first spoonful was indeed delicious. Cold, creamy, sweet. "I see why you like this," I told her. Then I asked gently, "Do you know how many fruits and sweet toppings are in here?" She shrugged. "Just the good stuff." That's when I explained that even good stuff, in large amounts, could become too much for her body, especially after everything we'd been learning. She looked down at the bowl, a little puzzled. "So what should I do? Not have it at all?" I shook my head. "No, just make it smaller and lighter. Enjoy the flavor, but skip the sugar mountain." We called the waiter and asked for a small empty bowl. I scooped half of her acai into it, leaving the rest for Elena to share. Then I moved some of the toppings aside, keeping just a few banana slices and a sprinkle of granola. She took another bite and smiled. "Still tastes wonderful," she admitted. And this time she ate slowly, savoring each spoonful. When she was done, she didn't feel overly full or sluggish, just content. A week later, she told me she had tried making her own at home with unsweetened acai puree, a few blueberries, and a topping of chopped nuts. "It's simpler," she said, "but I actually like it better." She laughed, telling me she felt proud of herself for finding a way to keep the treat but lose the overload. That's how change works, not by banning everything you love, but by reshaping it so it truly supports you. The acai bowl went from a sugar-laden indulgence to a thoughtful pleasure she could enjoy without worry. And in that small transformation, Thalassa gained something far more valuable than a trendy snack. She gained another piece of control over her health. Looking back over these past months with Thalassa, the changes might seem small from the outside. A handful of grapes with cheese instead of 20 at once, half a banana in the morning instead of a whole, a homemade smoothie instead of a sugary cafe cup. But for her, each change was a quiet victory, a step toward taking back control of her health without losing the joys she loved. She learned that it wasn't about giving up fruit, but about understanding how her body now meets it, gently, carefully, with balance. She discovered that she could still keep her traditions, but reshape them into something that would carry her forward instead of holding her back. And in doing so, she began to trust her body again, to listen to its whispers before they became warnings. Perhaps that's the greatest transformation of all, moving from unknowing habit to mindful choice. She no longer eats simply because it's healthy. She eats in a way that feels good long after the last bite, with steady energy, a calm heart, and a clear mind. And now I invite you to reflect. What small, loving adjustment could you make today for yourself? Maybe it's as simple as pairing your sweet treat with a handful of nuts. Maybe it's listening when your body says, enough, even if there's still more on the plate. The smallest changes, repeated with care, can become the strongest lines of defense for your heart and brain. So, as you go about your days, remember Thalassa's lesson. Health isn't built in grand gestures, but in the gentle, thoughtful moments you choose again and again. And somewhere down the road, you may find yourself smiling at a simple bowl of fruit, not just for its sweetness, but for the quiet strength it has helped you keep.